Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, season 3, episode 1. I cannot believe that we're already on season 3, and as always, I just want to say thank you so much for your consistent support, and I hope that you guys are enjoying these new episodes. I spent my weekend rewatching Criminal Minds as well as Vikings. I also finally got my passport in the mail, which is very exciting. So I hope you all had a great weekend and got to spend time with your loved ones. Today, we will be exploring a haunting tale of betrayal, violence, and the search for justice. The case we'll be covering is the Christine Marie Paolilla case, also known as the Clear Lake murders. Christine Marie Paolilla was born on March 31st, 1986 in Long Island, New York. Tragedy struck early in her life when her father died in a construction accident when she was just 2 years old. Her mother, Lori, later moved the family to the suburbs of Houston, Texas, seeking a fresh new start. From kindergarten onward, Christine battled alopecia, a condition causing her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes to fall out. This physical difference made her a target for relentless bullying. Classmates would tease her for the wig she wore and the drawn-on eyebrows she used to conceal her baldness. Her mother recounted the pain of watching her daughter endure such cruelty, exacerbated by Christine's poor vision and thick glasses, in an interview with ABC News. Quote, "That was devastating. She had poor vision, so she had what I guess most folks would know as Coke bottle glasses, and started being ridiculed by young children. Classmates would come up behind her and pull her wig off her head. It was painful to watch." Despite these challenges, Christine found friendship and a sense of belonging at Clear Lake High School in Houston. She struck up a close bond with Rachel Colaudis and Tiffany Rowell, who helped her discover confidence through makeup and stylish clothing. This transformation earned her the title of Miss Irresistible among her peers in 2003. Rachel kept a photo of Christine in her purse. The back of the picture said, "Damn, we've had some crazy memories. I love you." And this was written by Christine herself. However, Christine's life took a darker turn when she began dating Christopher Lee Snyder, a 21-year-old with a troubled history of criminal behavior and drug use. Despite warnings and disapproval from her family and friends, Christine remained committed to Christopher. Their relationship was marked by frequent arguments and instances of violence, illustrating the tumultuous path Christine was on. This loyalty to Christopher would ultimately lead Christine down a tragic path, culminating in events that would forever alter the lives of those involved. Christine began using drugs, and according to Christopher's family, their relationship was doomed from the start. One of their arguments resulted in Christine spending the night on the front lawn of his family's home, something that she would do frequently when they argued. She also threatened to kill them and refused to leave. She pulled on the screen door and tried to break into the home. She demanded Christopher to have violent, rough sex with her and told him to act as if he was punishing her. Christopher also was very pushy and aggressive. Christine's two friends, Rachel and Tiffany, urged her to break up with Christopher and told her that she could do so much better, but she refused to. Christopher's sister Brandy would say, quote, "I remember her being intensely jealous. There must have been some underlying jealousy between Christine and Rachel. When I saw photos of Rachel, I knew instantly. She was very beautiful." His sister would also say that Christine was known as the psycho in their house due to her obsessive behavior and crushing jealousy. She mentioned that her brother called the cops on her multiple times. As I mentioned earlier, Christine had two friends, Rachel and Tiffany. They both had graduated and brought home large cash tips from working at a local strip club. Tiffany was dating 19-year-old Marcus Ray Priscilla, and he dealt cocaine and ecstasy. On the afternoon of July 18, 2003, Christine and Christopher paid a visit to the home of Tiffany and Rachel in suburban Clear Lake City, Texas. Also present were Marcus Priscilla and his cousin, Aldebert Nicholas Sanchez, both 21 years old. They were having a pizza party. According to Christine, Christopher unexpectedly handed her a pistol upon arrival, initiating what would become a horrific chain of events. During the course of a robbery, Christopher allegedly shocked Christine by shooting Marcus Priscilla. This initial act of violence triggered a chaotic response from Christine, who claimed that the gun discharged accidentally as she reacted in a panicked and emotional state. However, Law enforcement's investigation painted a different picture. Upon arrival at the crime scene, they discovered 4 lifeless bodies in the living room, victims of a brutal and calculated attack. The scene revealed an excessive and deliberate use of force. A total of 40 gunshots had been fired. Most of these were directed at Tiffany and Rachel, who were shot in the groin, a detail absent in the injuries sustained by the men. Rachel was also found with a gunshot wound to her buttocks. This indicated that she may have been attempting to flee to the phone to call 911 before succumbing to her injuries. Shockingly, Christine proceeded to bludgeon Rachel with the back of the pistol while she was choking on her own blood and asking why continuously. This demonstrated what investigators described as a deeply personal and intense animosity towards the female victims. Less than an hour after, Christopher drove Christine to Walgreens so that she could clock into her job at the makeup counter as if nothing had happened. Christine and Christopher broke up in 2004 after he went to jail for stealing a car. Christine then went to rehab where she met her soon-to-be husband, Stanley Justin Rott. They got married in March of 2005. Now you may be wondering why they were able to just go on with their lives. Well, the case remained unsolved for 3 years. Police assumed that the murders were drug-related until a television special on the Houston murders aired on the 2nd anniversary of the murders, featuring a sketch resembling Christine as the suspect. Confronted with this revelation, Christine confessed her involvement to her new husband, prompting them to go into hiding for 7 months in a hotel room filled with heroin needles and filth in San Antonio, Texas. Police eventually apprehended Christine following a tip-off, while Christopher Snyder ended his life with a deliberate drug overdose during their pursuit. The tip was from her current husband, Stanley. At least that's what we believe. He stated he met Christine in rehab and that she confessed to him that she murdered the 4 victims in the Clear Lake massacre. I'm now going to read directly from the court document. The warrant was executed at 11:55 a.m. on July 19, 2006. When police entered the hotel room, they were met with evidence that the occupants had been using substantial amounts of heroin. Hundreds of used syringes littered the room. Appellant was wearing a t-shirt stained with blood, and several needle marks could be found over her body. Appellant was escorted to the San Antonio Police Department, where she agreed to a videotaped interview at 2:45 p.m. During the interrogation, Appellant admitted to driving Christopher to Tiffany's house on the day of the offense. She said they originally went there to purchase drugs, but they made a return trip when Christopher complained of forgetting something. Appellant insisted that Christopher went into the house by himself on both occasions, while she remained in the car. When Christopher returned the second time, she saw him running with a gun in his hands. She denied ever hearing any gunshots. The interrogation ended at approximately 3:50 p.m. Appellant, however, remained alone in the interview room as the recorder continued to tape. In the ensuing minutes, her condition clearly began to deteriorate. She grew visibly tired, appearing weak and sick. The recording ended just after 3:58 p.m. when Appellant requested to see a nurse, claiming that she was bleeding. Appellant was transported to Santa Rosa Hospital in San Antonio at approximately 4:12 p.m. Medical records indicate that she was currently menstruating, but no other signs of bleeding were reported. Appellant did present, though, with the chief complaint of heroin withdrawal. She informed doctors that she was accustomed to taking heroin every 10 to 15 minutes, and that her last injection was roughly 10 a.m. that morning. At 5:30 p.m., Appellant was administered 6 milligrams of morphine and 20 milligrams of methadone. Using only an audio recorder, interrogators continued their interviews inside the hospital at 6:15 p.m. During this session, Appellant again denied ever entering the home. She stated, however, that a fight erupted inside, with Christopher admitting to shooting all 4 victims. The interview concluded at 7:15 p.m., and at approximately 9 p.m., just before her discharge, Appellant received additional dosages of morphine and methadone. Appellant was flown to Houston later that evening. She slept on the flight and through part of the next day after being placed in a jail cell. Following an unrecorded interview during the afternoon of July 20th, Appellant complained of illness and requested to see a doctor. She was taken to Bentop Hospital at 6:50 p.m. and again treated for heroin withdrawal. this time receiving 25 milligrams of Librium at 10:07 p.m. Appellant was discharged at 11 p.m. and escorted back to police headquarters in downtown Houston. A final videotaped interrogation commenced at 11:38 p.m., and during this interview, appellant stated that Christopher forced her into the house on the return trip, making her hold one of his 2 guns. Although she denied aiming at any of the victims, she stated that Christopher pulled the trigger a number of times while she held the gun in her hand. The interrogation ended at 1:39 a.m. on July 21st. Appellant was then returned to her jail cell. The record does not show that she complained of illness following the interview. In a pretrial hearing, appellant moved to suppress all 3 recorded statements. Although advised of her Fifth Amendment rights before each interview, appellant complained that her statements were rendered involuntary because of medications she ingested and because she was suffering from acute opioid withdrawal. Appellant called a single expert witness, Dr. George S. Glass, a physician board certified in psychiatry and addiction medicine. Dr. Glass testified that appellant was a heroin addict with a very high tolerance for narcotics. He stated that heroin has a short half-life, meaning that it breaks down in the body relatively quick. If the addiction is not sustained, an abuser can suffer from withdrawal between 4 and 8 hours after her last injection. The physical symptoms of withdrawal, he said, include chills, fever, shaking, nausea, vomiting, and seizing. Dr. Glass assumed that appellant's last use of the drug prior to her arrest occurred between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. on July 19th. Based on that time frame, he supposed that appellant would have entered serious opioid withdrawal between 4 and 8 p.m. That evening, Dr. Glass observed the first videotaped interrogation, which ended just before 4 p.m., and stated that appellant was in acute withdrawal because she was wrapped in a thin blanket and shaking. Dr. Glass also described the drug treatment appellant received following her arrest. He said that 6 milligrams of morphine was a significant dosage normally reserved for intense pain, similar to the type of pain experienced by an adult male during a heart attack. Methadone, however, is commonly used when treating opioid dependence. The drug has a much longer half-life than heroin, and patients who take methadone will not usually enter maximum withdrawal until 24 hours after it was last ingested. Dr. Glass also stated that the high dosage of methadone demonstrated the extent of appellant's heroin addiction. The average person would have been comatose on that dosage, if not similarly tolerant to the drug. Dr. Glass explained that Librium is a minor tranquilizer also used in treating addictions. The drug removes the anxiety of withdrawal, but it does nothing for the cravings or for certain psychological symptoms, such as vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, and bone aches. According to Dr. Glass, appellant's dosage of Librium was the equivalent of consuming 3 to 5 shots of alcohol. Dr. Glass testified that appellant was not intoxicated during her 3rd interview in Houston. However, he stated that she did exhibit certain withdrawal symptoms, referencing a moment where she mentioned a desire to throw up. Dr. Glass observed shaking and anxiety, testifying that appellant's posture was a little bizarre, as though her muscles were in spasm. Because appellant received her last dosage of methadone more than 26 hours before this interview, Dr. Glass found her symptoms consistent with a person entering the peak of withdrawal. The state produced testimony from 3 police officers. Sergeant Brian Harris executed the arrest warrant and conducted the 2 recorded interviews in San Antonio. He testified that he has been a certified peace officer for 21 years. During his tenure on the police force, he personally observed the effects of heroin on users, which he claimed are typically marked by irrational behavior and slurred, incoherent speech. He also has observed the physical breakdown of a person entering withdrawal. According to Sergeant Harris, appellant did not appear to be under the influence of narcotics at the time of her arrest. During the first recorded interview, he stated that appellant was clear and calm, and her tone suggested an inquisitive demeanor. He testified that appellant did shake occasionally, but only when she was crying, which occurred during the interview's more sensitive material. Sergeant Harris denied seeing any signs of intoxication. When questioned whether appellant deliberated before giving her answers, he described her responses as calculated. Sergeant Harris accompanied appellant on her transfer to Santa Rosa Hospital. He testified that appellant was relaxed and conversational during the hospital interview. He described her answers as clear and concise. Despite her treatments of morphine and methadone, Sergeant Harris testified that appellant did not appear to be under the influence of any sort of intoxicant. Rather, he stated she was conscious and alert, and she made appropriate hand gestures when communicating her story. Officer Connie Park managed the intake desk at the Houston Police Department on the night of July 20th, 2006. Officer Park testified to having 12 years of experience with the police department, 4 of which were spent on the gang task force. During those 4 years, she encountered a number of people who were impaired by the influence of drugs. Sometime between 5:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on July 20th, Officer Park was asked to escort appellant to the bathroom, where she had a casual conversation. Officer Park testified that during their brief discussion, she observed none of the signs of impairment that typically accompany drug use. Officer Park described appellant's speech as clearly coherent and matter-of-fact. In her view, appellant appeared to be oriented to time and place, and neither upset nor distraught. She also testified that appellant made no complaints about withdrawing from heroin. Sergeant Breck C. McDaniel conducted the videotaped interview in Houston. He testified to having 13 years of experience with the Houston Police Department. In that time, his work has involved some exposure with heroin addicts. He stated that heroin is a depressant, and addicts tend to appear tired or lethargic. He also testified that he has witnessed the symptoms of withdrawal, which primarily include vomiting, seizing, sweating, and visible illness. Sergeant McDaniel testified that appellant displayed none of these symptoms during her interview. Occasionally, appellant did seem upset. When she recounted the shootings, for instance, her hand shook and she began to cry. Sergeant McDaniel allowed her frequent breaks to compose herself, even permitting her to smoke and drink a soda. According to him, she appeared physically fine and lucid throughout the interview. The trial court denied the appellant's motion to suppress. The court later issued findings of facts, which stated that the testimony from Sergeant Harris, Officer Park, and Sergeant McDaniel was credible and reliable. In the findings, the court also concluded that appellant was not intoxicated or suffering from withdrawal symptoms, and that during all 3 interviews, she was lucid and capable of understanding the warnings given to her and the nature of her statements. Furthermore, the court specifically found that Dr. Glass's opinions were not supported by the evidence and therefore not reliable. Because the court determined that appellant voluntarily waived her rights in supplying her statements, all 3 recordings were later published for the jury's consideration. 2 eyewitnesses placed appellant at the scene of the crime. Michelle and Craig Lackner live next door to Tiffany Rowell. The Lackners testified that on the day of the offense, they both observed a young man and woman casually walking down the street and approach Rowell's house. In court, the Lackners identified appellant as the girl they had witnessed. They denied seeing her with a gun, but they each said that she was carrying a purse. Using a 6-person photo spread, the Lackners also identified Christopher as the accompanying male. Stanley was called as a witness for the prosecution as well. He testified to calling in the tip to Crime Stoppers after learning of the offense from his wife. He said that he met appellant at a drug treatment center in Kerrville around November 2004, more than a year after the murders. The two were married about 4 months later. During their courtship, appellant vaguely told him of an incident with her former boyfriend that resulted in the deaths of 4 people. On a later occasion, she elaborated that she and Christopher went to Tiffany's house in Clear Lake. Just before entering the house, Christopher handed her a gun, which she carried in her purse. The intention was to take some drugs and money, but not hurt anyone, she stressed. According to Stanley, appellant mentioned that she and Christopher were invited into Tiffany's house, where they eventually started shooting at the 4 people inside. After leaving, appellant told Christopher that she needed to make sure they were really dead. Appellant then returned to find Rachel choking on her own blood. Stanley testified that appellant admitted to beating Rachel with her gun until she was dead. Bullets from 2 separate weapons were recovered at the scene. Kim Downs, the state's firearms examiner, testified that bullets from both sets of guns were found in the bodies of Tiffany and Marcus. The bullets were later traced to 2 handguns found in Louisville, Kentucky, in a safe stored at the home of Christopher's stepfather. Dr. Morna Gonsolin, the state's medical examiner, testified that in addition to several gunshot wounds, Rachel suffered skull fractures consistent with blunt force trauma to the head. Part of appellant's defensive strategy was to attack Stanley's credibility. In his opening statement, defense counsel suggested that he reported his wife to Crime Stoppers in order to claim a substantial reward. Defense counsel further argued that Stanley made a deal with the state to testify falsely against appellant so that he might avoid prosecution for the heroin recovered in the San Antonio hotel. Defense counsel attempted to elicit testimony regarding this deal from Thomas Pardue and his daughter, Lane, a woman whom Stanley began to date following appellant's arrest. Much of the Pardue's testimony was interrupted by various objections from the state. During the closing argument, defense counsel again referred to Stanley's alleged deal with the prosecution and his relationship with the Pardues. The trial court sustained the prosecutor's objection to these arguments as being outside the record. The prosecutor then responded to these exact arguments in his own closing statement. The prosecutor told the jury, "Mr. Pardue, I feel sorry for that man. I truly do. I mean, he has gone through hell for his daughter, but you don't get to know everything. You probably figured out by now you cannot know all the facts and circumstances of a case. You hear us making objections, you've got to go outside the room and come back inside the room. You don't know the whole truth about everything that happened in this case. When it's all over, we will tell you the whole truth." Appellant objected that this argument improperly encouraged the jury to convict her on facts not admitted in evidence. The objection was sustained, and the trial court instructed the jury to disregard the statement. The trial court further admonished that, quote, "The only thing you can base your verdict on is the evidence that you have in front of you." Appellant also moved for a mistrial, but that was denied. Throughout her legal proceedings, Christine consistently shifted blame onto Christopher, never fully accepting responsibility for her actions. However, her new husband's testimony played a crucial role in her conviction on 4 counts of capital murder. Due to her status as a minor during the crimes, she avoided the death penalty but received a sentence of 40 years to life in prison. This tragic and complex case continues to raise profound questions about the nature of influence, culpability, and the devastating consequences of unchecked jealousy and violence. She was sentenced to a mandatory term of life imprisonment instead. On appeal, she challenges the constitutionality of her sentence, the denial of her motion to suppress, and the denial of her motion for mistrial. The case reached its climax with Assistant District Attorneys Rob Freyer and Greg Goodhart, alongside defense attorney Mike DeGuerin, delivering impassioned closing arguments, each aiming to dismantle the other's narrative. DeGuerin vigorously sought to undermine the prosecution's case, portraying Christine as an unwilling participant coerced by her then-boyfriend, Christopher Snyder. He urged jurors not to convict her unless they were convinced of her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, emphasizing Christopher's suicide and questioning police interrogation tactics. In contrast, Freyer challenged the defense's betrayal, questioning whether such a tragic event could have occurred without Christine's involvement. He highlighted Christine's actions post-murder, including multiple calls to Christopher, suggesting a deeper complicity. Displaying photos of the victims, Freyer underscored the irrevocable loss suffered by their families, contrasting their fate with Christine's future in prison. Goodhart took a different approach, labeling the incident as a drug-fueled home invasion. He argued that Christine knowingly participated, citing her own admission of having blood on her hands and alleging her active role in the crime. Both sides rested their cases after presenting compelling testimony. Christine, who was 17 at the time of the murders and thus ineligible for the death penalty, stood accused of accompanying Christopher to the scene and participating in the deaths of Tiffany Rowell, Rachel Ann Colordis, Marcus Ray Priscilla, and Aldebert Nicholas Sanchez during what began as a pizza party. The case unfolded with tragic details. Christopher took his own life shortly after Christine's arrest, leaving behind unresolved questions and contrasting accounts of the events. Expert testimony contradicted Christine's version, indicating technical inconsistencies in her claims about the firearms used. Christine's husband, Stanley Justin Rott, testified extensively, detailing her repeated confessions and their shared struggles with heroin addiction. Medical evidence revealed the victim suffered multiple gunshot wounds, with additional blunt force trauma noted in Marcus and Rachel. Dr. George Glass, a defense witness, shed light on Christine's troubled past, describing the profound impact of familial tragedies and personal health challenges, including alopecia. He asserted her vulnerability to negative influences such as Christopher due to her turbulent upbringing and addiction issues. In his assessment, Dr. Glass questioned Christine's capacity to waive her rights during police questioning, attributing her state of withdrawal to a fixation on drugs rather than a clear understanding of the proceedings. He cited observations from police footage emphasizing her impaired decision-making abilities under such circumstances. The trial's conclusion left jurors to weigh these complex narratives against the backdrop of Christine's troubled history and the stark realities of addiction and violence. I'm now going to play a short bit of her interrogation video. I would play the whole thing, but this was the only piece that I could find.
Okay, but a few years ago, who was Chris Snyder to you?
Very controlling, very scary person. Whenever whenever his temper was pushed, or whenever he would felt he had to prove something, he would act very bully-like, very like hard-ass kind of. And there's been times where he'd get almost satanic, talking about people, like, I wonder what it'd be like to kill someone, or I wonder what it'd be like to die. There's been times he's admitted to trying to commit suicide or trying to have cops kill him. There's been so many times where me and him have gotten into fights and physical fights, and he's very manipulative, very
Let me stop. Is it safe to say, were you romantically involved with Chris a few years ago?
Yes.
Was he your boyfriend?
Yes.
How long did y'all date?
About a year.
About a year?
Almost.
Okay. Was it a love-hate relationship? Did you have strong feelings for him?
At first, it was a really good relationship. Then he started, I guess once he got used to the relationship, when, more like shyness.
Newness wore off?
Yeah, he got very take charge, very demanding.
Okay.
And if he didn't get what he wanted, he would do whatever it took to, get me to, do something for him, or, or say something for him, or just pretty much, he really could, he knew that what my weak spots were, and when I would be in a weak state of mind, and when he really could get to me, he knew what to say about my past, what to say personal things about me to make me feel very, almost like jelly, kind of.
Insecure?
Very insecure, just very, like nothing, very numb, very, just
okay. So it's safe to say this man had a big effect on you,
yes.
Right? Did you say a father-like relationship? Than what you said once?
Yes, I did, because I had lost my father at a very young age, and when I first started dating Chris, he acted like, he was the man,
Mm-hmm.
and he would, try to, buy everything, and just, he acted, it's almost like he was a father figure to me, because he'd always, said he'd take care of me, and I always had that, in my mind, not that, like, he is my father, but
I understand.
This is
The dominant male in your life?
Yeah, this is that part of, my life that was taken out once, and now, like, he's filling that.
What an insane case. I was in shock while doing research on this case and learning that Christine could brutally murder the only people that ever showed compassion to her. I couldn't imagine what was going through their head when they saw it was Christine committing these acts of violence against them. All evidence, including photos, the interrogation video, and all court documents will be linked in the show notes as always. You can also find photos on our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast. Feel free to also follow my personal Instagram if you'd like. It's at Annalisa, and I hope to see y'all in the next one. Thank you so much for listening.